an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Reaper, chapters 11, 12, and 13. In these chapters, our crew is up against more hydras. I thought it was going to be just the one hydra. It wasn't just the one hydra at all, actually. I don't like it, guys. I don't like it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Andy, if you're here in the chat, what's up, buddy? So I just wanted to let you guys know I was keeping an eye on the number of episodes left to cover this book. And there are only 5 remaining, including today. And I realized that if I kept going with just the 2 chapters at a time that I had been, it was not going to finish the book out. So I am having to bump up how much I'm reading per episode to make sure that it falls in line with the pre-booking that Andy made. So I am going to really have to focus in order to make sure that I am finishing things within the time frame, because as you all know, I don't have an awesome track record for that. So, fingers crossed, and just bear with me, and if I need a prod and you think I'm spending too much time talking about something, just be like, hey, Tosh, you might want to drop this. And I will probably be a little annoyed in the moment and then be like, no, but you're right, though. So, just letting you all know, help me. Andy is here. Hi. Hi, Tan. Oh, thank you. Okay, so, chapter 11. I am not going to go into a ton of detail on each of the individual Hydra fights in particular. I mean, the last, 4 Hydra fights, it's not like Will White even goes into a lot of detail on it either, because those almost all happen off page. And then we come back, and I think it's Orthos who asks Yaren, how many was that? And she's like, that was 6. That was the 6th one. And guys, I figured out what it is. So, and it's not actually a super logical reasoning, but I think you guys are going to get what I mean. When I say I don't like this, I don't actually mean I don't like it in the sense that I don't want to read it, or I don't, you know what I mean? What I mean is, this particular storyline is amping my anxiety up in a way that other stories haven't. And I was trying to put my finger on why. And I think that what it is that everybody is sort of trapped in here in a way that feels like they aren't fully in control of whether they engage or not. So we have a moment in which it feels like they're going to try and choose which way to go. And then Ethan and Lyndon get separated from everybody. There is just such a lack of control here that makes me extremely uncomfortable. You guys know, I'm a bit of a control freak in life, so this is not surprising anybody. But, in the tournaments, they chose to join. They know what they're up against. It may be that they are not going to win, but I at least feel like there are rules. There are people watching. There are restrictions on what can and can't be done. And it all feels like it's in a controlled environment. That's my favorite. Even when we're talking about out on the battlefield, there are still, in a way, rules where if they did XYZ, maybe they could pull it off, but they would piss off whatever clans and houses, and that would have its own kind of consequences. So there are sort of restrictions in that sense as well. And when you're out on the battlefield, you can just leave. Not that they would, but you could. you could just, you know, and there's also the possibility of like being able to find anything out there, especially with Lyndon. He's absolutely like leveling up by sucking power from other people. So now that his arm is injured and he can't do that the same way anymore, it just adds a whole other level of like, oh, but come on, you know? So I think there's just a sense of claustrophobia and almost like mean-spiritedness. And I mean like the mean-spiritedness is subject one. Like subject one is here fucking with them, moving them, changing where the walls and ceilings are. Like spatial shit isn't working properly. They are having trouble opening their void keys. Even the Soul Forge is like in a void key-ish setup. So the Soul Forge, I'm very excited about it, but also it feels like this is the actual worst place to try to use it. And it just, look, this is what makes a good story. So full respect, and I'm here for the ride, don't get me wrong. But I can't deny that I feel like more of a tightness in my stomach and this anxiety when I read this than I feel like I have on a lot of other ones. And I mean, I think maybe the last book only exceeds because it was so much more emotional. With Lyndon meeting up with his family and them truly not believing that he had like really advanced at all, that was like a gut punch in a way that was, because we had been looking forward to this moment for so long, it felt even more dramatic. And I think this, I was looking forward to it in a way because I'm like, I'm sure there is a lot of treasure in there. But again, the sense of like, I'm trapped in here with God knows what. We have to get to the middle and practically nobody has ever done that. And the thing in the middle is super scary, by the way, and like incredibly powerful and maybe the worst thing that you would ever want to travel toward to begin with. So just overall, I have very conflicting feelings about it. And these chapters did not help with that at all. I also should mention that these 3 chapters, we are completely in the labyrinth the entire time. I sort of expected that we would like bounce back out to Jailong or maybe to Malice, and we don't do that. And I'm fine with that, but it is like a little bit surprising considering how much we had been bouncing around, that we go 3 chapters in a row and we don't do that at all. So, okay. Guys, by the way, Ethan is really like, it feels like this book, we are going to get more info on him than we have ever gotten before. And I am really interested. And there is a point later, I've mentioned the Soul Forge, and this is the thing that he basically extorted from Reigan Shen. In order to throw the fight, this is the thing that he demanded. And Reigan Shen did not want to give up the thing, but also he's like the only person maybe on the entire planet who could make another one. So he did it, but he also made it known when he did, I'm not fucking budging on another thing. That's the last thing that you can ask of me that I'm going to be willing to part with. And we find out that Ethan used it to make the what is it? The rainstorm baptism? I forget the name of it, guys. For Zeal. And he's holding on to it for like one more treatment. But he plans to hand it over to Lyndon. And I'm just jumping ahead here. I'm going to talk about this scene. Lyndon's gratefulness in this moment is so sweet. And I was so glad that Ethan genuinely seems like a little puzzled at how grateful Lyndon is. Because the way that Lyndon phrases it is like, you've given me so much already. And Ethan says, I consider everything that I have given you like the best investment I have ever made. And it was sort of fascinating to me that Lyndon isn't really like asking questions about that anymore. What he means by investment. And I don't know if it's because Lyndon thinks that this is what that investment is towards to deal with subject one, or if he's just sort of accepted that Ethan's not going to tell him the entire story, because, like, we don't really know entirely what it is that he is up to here still. And I have grown to trust Ethan much, much more, but nevertheless, it just has me on my guard a little bit, you know? But I also thought it was sort of precious that he's showing Lyndon this, and first of all, Lyndon doesn't think he's giving it to him. Lyndon is just like, wait, what? And I was like, Lyndon, you're an incredibly gifted soulsmith. Of course he's giving this to you. Like, also, he says something about how the soulsmith was, like, created by a genius, and Lyndon stops and is like, do you mean that you made it? And he's like, ouch, which was such a good moment, because honestly, I kind of had the same thing where I was like, that sounds like you're talking about yourself, Ethan, but we know that you didn't make this, so what's up? And then he has to sort of eat that from Lyndon. So the whole situation with this Soul Forge is really fascinating. I'm going to back up again, and I just wanted to address that, like, one scene because it sort of tied into some other things that I was talking about. Pure Storm baptism. Thank you, Sammy. And Sammy also says it's 3:30 a.m. in India right now. I stay up for this. Sammy, you maniac. Thank you, but also just, you know, be careful. Just be careful. Sleep is nothing to fuck with. That's all I'm saying. So there's this moment here. I love this so much. The first attack that Yaren uses, Lyndon thinks Orthos and Little Blue wouldn't even have been able to stand very close to if it weren't for his protection. From the other end of the tunnel, they heard a monstrous scream. Wonder what that was, Ethan said brightly. Oh, Ethan, you ball breaker. And he has this, like, kind of going on and off in these 3 chapters, where occasionally he will chime in with something really useful, and occasionally he stands back and seems to want everyone else to figure it out or follow chains of logic, or he's just, like, distracted by whatever it is that he is sensing. And I gotta tell you guys, I have said this in other contexts before, but I'm going to mention the example that I always think of first here. Forgive me, it's Harry Potter. So you spend the first 4 Harry Potter books going through a particular sort of routine, with Harry boarding the Hogwarts Express on a certain day, and then he rides to Hogwarts, and he has his, you know, Great Hall thing and all of that. And it all is familiar in a way that's comforting. Even with the second book where they fly in the flying Ford Anglia, they had met on the platform, or they had met in the London platform. There's just, like I'm saying, the sense of routine and almost ritual to things. And then you get the 5th book, and everything is off. And Hagrid isn't there, and the whole, like, energy is different and weird because of Cedric and the amping up of stakes. Everything has been laid in place in such a way, and you've gotten to know the role each character plays in such a way that when you change any of it, as a reader, you're like, what? Wait, what the fuck? It's truly jarring. And I kind of felt that way with Ethan in these chapters. I am so used to his playful, mysterious arrogance that when we start seeing him here consistent, like we've seen him get anxious or worried or angry before, but it's been sort of spikes of it, and then it dissipates because we're handling a situation. In these chapters, it just feels like it keeps happening really close together. It feels like he is off his game consistently in a way that I find really worrying. And I probably shouldn't find it that worrying, because there's a sense that he knows more than anybody about what's going to be going on in this place. But I'm not entirely like convinced of that. I feel like maybe he thinks he knows. There's also the possibility that he might be pretending to be less prepared for things than he is, because we, like I said, we see him standing back and letting Lyndon figure things out when they're like in a different room, separated from everyone. So there might be an aspect of that where he's like, yeah, shit is fucked up, but also they need to be like put through a gauntlet, and I kind of have to let them learn their own lessons here. And I would love to believe that that's what it is, but I am not entirely convinced. And Ethan is somebody that I have seen as the safety net. That's pretty much like, he is a delight. He provides a lot of like useful information, equipment, resources, whatever. But in the end, I have really always seen him as the one who can like kind of save the day if need be. And even now that our crew has leveled up so much, I still see him that way, whether that's really appropriate or not. So the fact that we have him feeling at a loss in certain of these situations, it just, for me, this is when the stakes have felt higher than they ever have. You know, it's just a whole different vibe when the person that you have seen as the sort of like, I guess like the sort of patriarch of the group is off his footing. And again, we'll see if he really is, or if that's the impression that he's trying to give, or what. But I don't really want Ethan to be so in control all the time that he's just pretending to be off his game here. I feel like you get to a point where if a character is always constantly playing their own game, it might begin to be a little bit tedious and that character feels almost OP. I don't really think we're in danger of that, but you know what I'm saying. So I would be fine with it in a storytelling perspective if he is off game. But as a reader, it makes me really nervous, and it changes the whole like energy of the group and what they're doing together. Okay, so Yama says it's troubling, isn't it? I was scared as fuck. Yeah, exactly. So we have the fight against the Hydra, and everybody is noticing that the Hydra is not taking as much damage from their attacks as it should. And it turns out that, webs of hunger madra shot out of the tunnels from every direction. There was a distinct will behind these attacks, and Lyndon knew they had finally caught Subject 1's attention. And suspended in midair, with no aura to push against, Lyndon felt the pangs of panic. If he had been drawing from his pure core, he would have had a better defense, but he was already channeling Black Flame to attack the Hydra. The burning cloak appeared around him, and he dodged most of the threads. One landed against his hip with a burning sensation, and he lost a little energy to it before he twisted to break it. And then Little Blue screams because a strand has touched her, and that is when Lyndon is like, oh, okay, we are not going to fucking play anymore. He surrounds himself with a hollow armor and lands on the body. Then he slammed his palm down on its scales. An instant later, a forged hand bigger than his body followed the motion of his own palm. Pure Madra coursed into the Hydra, and the light in its 6 eyes flickered. The others exploded with their own techniques, and Lyndon switched back to Black Flame. He drove a beam of black dragon's breath up through one of the snake's heads. Honestly, is this like so badass? Like truly, it's just so badass. Yaren sliced off a second, Azil crushed a third, and then the room was filled with the hiss of rising essence and a tide of death aura. So, this is a dread beast, as it turns out. So there isn't going to be a remnant, because Lyndon's all ready to cope with it, and Ethan is like, that's not the thing, actually. We don't have to worry about it. And this is like one of the first moments where Ethan says, look for yourself. And Lyndon does. And he is just like, why does it look like it actually has Madra channels? And it's like actual flesh, but there's death Madra? I didn't think those things even went together. How does that go? And Lyndon remembered a vision Suriel had shown him not so long ago. A white tiger the size of a house, strung up and splayed open so he could separate its spirit from its body surgically. Its spirit had been every bit as intricate as its flesh, with the two layered over and into one another, so it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. I had forgotten about that vision, and I will admit, remembering it made me feel a little bit more confident in this entire situation here. Once I was like, oh, right, she had a vision of Lyndon having, like, literally killed a dread god, basically. Okay, you know, maybe it'll be fine. Of course, anything can happen. So, this is when he has trouble trying to open his void key, and they don't really, like, zero in on what the problem is until later as they realize that basically anything that has to do with understanding the way that space works in the labyrinth is fucked up, because Subject 1 is kind of doing whatever it feels like. It's using its abilities to shift things in a way that shouldn't be possible. And thus, when you use a void key that has to depend on the stability of space that it's in, it doesn't work reliably, and you need to expend more effort in order to open it. So, I'm going to be honest, guys. There is a lot here about the intricacies of the soul smithing in terms of, you know, him expecting that there's more than one binding, and there isn't, and just the general expectation that Lyndon has of what this creature would be versus what it actually turns out to be. And I am not going to get too much into all of the details of that because, frankly, I don't really feel like a lot of it is, I won't say it's not significant, but it's the sort of thing that I feel like plot-wise it's going to fold into major plot elements later, and I don't really need to go over everything in detail in that respect. So, in the interest of time, because I have a bad record, we're going to move past that. The one thing is that Lyndon knows that the binding is definitely probably going to be made into a weapon, but he just doesn't know what it will be for yet. He uses the hand to try and decide where to go next, and he feels it pulling him in two directions. It repeated that several times until some hungry ghouls crawled their way through the stone, and the others eradicated them. He had to tuck the hand away so it didn't keep calling hostile attention. So there are two tunnels, one that is marked with the hammer of the forgers, and one that has the crest of the Aurelius founder. And he just, like, automatically is like, well, obviously we want to follow Osriel's deal. And he walks that way, and just as he is, Zeal calls out, "Hang on, the script is diff," and the tunnel entrance vanishes, and the two of them are separated from everybody else. I just felt such fucking panic over this, and I just hated it. It turns out to be kind of interesting because Mercy, rightfully, as I have said, keeps urging for speed. She's just like, we are taking too fucking long about this. We really need to push it a little bit more. And it almost feels like the two of them these two groups had to be separated from one another in order for Lyndon to take his time with what he winds up finding, because Mercy probably wouldn't have, like, been able to stand by and let him examine shit the way that he does. But Yaren has a really interesting, like, kind of moment here that I thought was moving, honestly. she is sensing that something else is coming. She feels a larger, greater presence than the Hydra, but of the same sort of energy above. And as it turns out, like she has this image in her head of a mother giving birth to these Hydras. And that's not like exactly what it is, but it's not what it is. And before she rises up and finds out what's there, the ceiling opens and a Hydra drops down on them. And what they figure out is going on. They kill the Hydra, and then the ghouls come and devour all of the Hydra's body and essence, and then they bring it up and create another Hydra out of it. They just keep recycling this. We get this line here, guys, from Orthos. I saw some swordfish feed in a river once. They stripped a bird the size of a house down to its bones in seconds. Do swordfish live in rivers? Mercy asked. Not swordfish. Swordfish. Their teeth are swords. Oh, God. I don't know why that got me so much, but that was really fucking funny. So, in the midst of this, Yaren is thinking, like, I am really going to have to be careful about what I'm using down here, because I'm not able to refill my Madra easily. The aura down here isn't the type that I need, and I just have to protect the others. And there is this beautiful moment, guys, where essentially Mercy is like, I think once we have the option, we should leave. And essentially saying, you and Ethan and Lyndon can keep going, but we can't handle this, and we're just getting in the way. And Yaren kind of puts on this display of badassery and then says, you guys will catch up. And in the meantime, what's so wrong with letting me carry you? And I love this so much. This is something that I think many of us struggle with. Feeling like we have to bring something of our own to the table. And if we don't, that we're like, I don't know, we're mooching or we're freeloading somehow. Or at the very least, like Mercy frames it, we're getting in the way. We're some kind of burden, and you would function better without us. And I love that basically Yaren is like, I wouldn't want to be down here by myself, though. Like, even if I have to carry you, it still means that you're here with me. Like, that equation, in my opinion, is still a positive. And it's just really sweet. You know, we know that Yaren's whole thing with her insight into why she has been pursuing the sacred arts is because she wants to be able to protect people. She doesn't want to have anybody die on her again. She just can't take it. And the fact that she has this, like, she looks around and realizes that she has abilities that mean she can help protect these people, these beings. I shouldn't say, well, I don't know. People can be used in the way that, like, oh, you have consciousness and a personality, and Orthos does. So I think I'd call Orthos a person. Just, I don't know. There was something really beautiful about it, and I really liked how Mercy reacted, because I wasn't sure how she would behave. Mercy is used to being more powerful, you know. It's been quite an adjustment for her being around these two after they had managed to advance, and she hasn't. And she is just as touched as I was, and I was really happy about it. And everybody seems to react well to this and to appreciate her just wanting them with her. I will say, though, as she's sort of thinking through the way that it would go with everybody and how she plans to, like, you know, go down fighting, she admits that she doesn't really understand Zeal still. He's a mystery to her in a lot of ways. And it's not like she doesn't feel that she can rely on him, but she just doesn't really know how things would go with him, because she hasn't gotten a grip on his personality well enough to predict the way he will respond to certain things. And I don't want to say that I expect we'll learn a lot more about Zeal in this book, because I don't get the sense that's going to happen in this one. I may be wrong about that. But because we have only one more pure storm baptism before it seems like he's sort of completely restored to himself, I think it's coming. And like, we have been in his head to a point, you know, we've seen some of how his mind works. But I don't know. It's almost like when you're in his head, you can feel him being withholding to himself. Like, he isn't allowing himself to think certain things because he tried to cut himself off from certain parts of who he is. So, yeah, I'm very intrigued by Zeal. I find him really, like, enjoyable, and he has so much potential. And also, he just has very, like, strong, for me anyway, Zoro from One Piece vibes at this point, you know, I could really picture him being asleep if we were on a cloud ship until a fight starts. And then he fights like a fucking maniac and then goes back to sleep and rolls his eyes at everybody and is just constantly irritated, but he's still there for them. You know, he's still 100% part of the team. So Lyndon is going forward in this tunnel, and just before Ethan yells for him to stop, he senses something and realizes that there is like this glass right up against his nose that is made of like pure destruction aura. And Ethan says, I'm not sure that would have been tough enough to break you, but I don't want to be performing emergency medical aid here in an ancient tomb at the heart of the world. And he asks Dross what it is, and Dross says, I think it's a good thing you weren't a little faster. Ha, ha. Dross, Lyndon specifically requested that you not do that anymore. So can you just, like, pull back on that, buddy? Like, just don't, because it's awful and we hate it. It's very bad. Just don't do it anymore. It's very bad. So this is when they start to, let's see, but they're talking about the various protections in this area and whether or not Osriel foresaw how things were going to be built around it, or whether he just like was protecting against other things. And they're sort of guessing at a lot of this. And this is when Ethan says, making my own guess would be less than productive. Why don't you see if you can guess the thoughts of a genius soulsmith? Might be good for you. Again, there's just this sort of, I'm trying to lead you in a certain direction. And Ethan has always done that. He's always felt that way. He has a particular plan that he knows what would probably be best, and he is just hoping you're smart enough to make the good choice. But I don't feel like he's ever been quite as teacher-like about it. It has always felt like before he has been much more of a parent type in a way, where he's like, I mean, I'm going to give you two choices, but I'm also going to make it pretty clear that there's really only one choice. And this, it feels a lot more hands off and less manipulative, much more direct, you know? So this is when they go into this room. There were 8 tables, each with a similar pile. Not one of the objects held any obvious spiritual power, at least none that remained. But there were a few spots of dream madra, and the sources were obvious. Tiny crystals had been tied to each object, and Lyndon ran his spiritual sense over into one such dream tablet. And we get a series of weird memories. There's this one woman who orders the execution of a woman who looks just like her. And Lyndon is feeling the chaotic nature of these dream tablets. Maybe they have been sort of fractured, or maybe it's a composite of like more than one memory somehow. And she had been the owner of the necklace. She was known for always wearing this, and it had become one of her signatures. And then he checks another one, a signet ring bearing the image of a winged ship. This one belonged to a water artist who fought across the seas. Lyndon finally sensed something heavy, more real than the objects around it. And so he starts to separate out the ones that give him a more positive feeling and the ones that seem like they might be more worthwhile than others. And Ethan is examining one, and he has this sad smile on his face. And he says, "My sense for these things is not as developed as yours," which is like really saying something, because I just see him as being the all-knowing one. And I'm really having to get used to readjusting my thinking on that, because Lyndon being a sage now means that he has like a different way to interact with the world now. And I'm just not used to it yet. I have to get with the program. So this is a room where Asriel put things that he thought might eventually be worth something, but could be made into greater, perhaps, weapons. And he tells Lyndon the story here. "I became the advisor to the monarch, Tiberian Aurelius, very early in my advancement. I've always had a knack for understanding the records of my predecessors, not just dream tablets, but their writings. There were patterns that I picked up on that very few have ever put together. I believed that I could advance my family, and perhaps the world, by revealing these truths. And one such truth I revealed was this." He held up Asriel's marble. "His records were hidden among my family for hundreds of generations, and if you know how to read them, they contained insight applicable to more than just soulsmithing. They locked this away and worshipped it, instead of following the path it outlined. Of course, there have been members of my family who have ascended. In the grand scheme of things, it isn't terribly unusual to ascend beyond this world, but none of them picked up the banner he tried to pass them. With Tiberian, I thought we had a chance. And then, against my advice, he approached the other monarch on the continent." Lyndon's stomach dropped. "You're not saying his name." Ethan looked into the darkness. No, I'm not." The end of the 3rd chapter of these 3. Reigan Shen is here already, guys. Can I just tell you how little I expected to be seeing him this soon? I really didn't. Really didn't. I was not prepared at all. And who knows, like, what the encounter is going to be, but genuinely taken so fucking off guard by that, I can't even explain. So this is when we go to Yaren and the fighting where Mercy says, "I think I might head back once we meet up with the others. You'll catch up, and until you do, what's so bad about letting me carry you?" Orthos burned so clearly with the resolve to improve himself that Yaren could practically see it. Mercy's eyes welled up, and even Zeal gripped his hammer a little harder. Yaren felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Not only did she have friends along, but she was in a position where she could protect them. Ruby would be just as happy as Yaren was. I really enjoy these references to Ruby. Like, she's around. She's in there somewhere. It's just a weird conjoining of the two of them. So we go back to Lyndon here, and he's like worried that there might not be a way back to their friends, but both Ethan and Dross think that is very unlikely. If I'm wrong, you burn through the walls. With the void icon and black flame, it should be possible. Dross, can you simulate a soulsmithing project? Somewhat. My capabilities are not what they were, but as long as we can rely on known information, I should be able to replicate a simple project successfully. Once again, Lyndon missed the real Dross. Same. same. I admit, I think that this is good for Lyndon. Genuinely. I don't like to say that he was growing too dependent on Dross as much as it was an instinct for him to rely on Dross's judgment on things first. And probably if he's going to like continue to advance, he needs to begin to reason things for himself a little bit more and use like, I want to say use his head more, but that feels like I'm saying he wasn't. And Dross is like kind of part of his head. So using Dross is using his head. But you know what I mean. It's just, there are probably going to be situations in which Dross would not be able to tell him what was going on or the best way to handle it, or maybe not be available, as we're seeing now. And I think it's probably good for him, but I hate it in the midst of it. It's awful. A lot of the things that are best for us are awful when we are in the middle of them. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. Or it's a fortunate fact, like, you know, it's the, however you want to look at it, but mostly it sucks when you're in it. So this is when he finds something that's I believe a binding, that has several techniques, like somehow worked within it and like functioning together. And he has never seen this before. Sometimes soulsmiths could blend one into the other, but it always created a hybrid technique. It never layered the two techniques on top of one another. If you wanted the techniques to be used together or in sequence, you had to design your construct to allow it. Usually that had to be done with scripts. But this dread beast had only one binding for several techniques, as though its bindings had all organically fused into one, which is really cool. I'm very curious about this, even though I said I wasn't going to get too much into this, and I won't. But I did want to like mention that because I have to assume he's going to be able to do something with this to improve his arm, right? That's what I'm like banking on, is that I don't know what he's going to do, but something with multiple techniques, and I don't even know what that looks like, guys. Like, maybe it could be some... I don't even want to theorize because it's going to take up too much time. But the one thing I can think is that when he drains people of power, he has to separate out what he can use and what he can't. And maybe he could create a technique in which what he can't use can be expelled as a force to be used as a weapon as well. You know, just off the top of my head. I don't know, but I am really interested to see what he does with this. I really have enjoyed getting to see Lyndon Soulsmith when we have. I would like to see more of it, honestly. Like, if Will White wants to write some short stories, like Jim Butcher writes microfictions between books where he has like a particular character's POV, and it's usually a character that you never get a good look at in the books, or, you know, it's just kind of an insight into something you wouldn't see otherwise. But if we got to like watch Lyndon Soulsmith, maybe from somebody else's POV in a particular book or microfiction, I would be into it. All I can think of is, I can't remember who he was with, but it's the scene where he is getting points, and it's the first like task that he has been sent on when he's in charge, and he has to like knock Pride out for the lead role, and he just like builds a fucking cannon in like 10 minutes on the way to the, you know, it's just really fun. I enjoyed it a lot, so I'm into it. I would like to see more of this. So here we go. And Ethan at this point is like, by the way, I'm just sitting here watching you like hold air. It's super boring, and I kind of don't want to just sit here and watch you hold air anymore. And Lyndon asks Dross if he can like project it into Ethan's head, and Dross is like, I can, but it will use up a lot of mana. And finally, Ethan's like, oh, fine, okay. So this is when Ethan says, disturbing implications, but that was always one of the strongest theories about the origins of the dread beasts, that they were the failures and the successes were the dread gods. And the theory is that this is the kind of binding dread gods have. And then we get this wonderful moment here where Ethan is like, oh, did you want to work on this? Do you want to work on this and like find out more about it? I need to hear you say the words. Lyndon was lost. Say, please, Ethan, solve this problem for me. It's not a problem, really. I could examine it now, but I think it's better to wait until later. Okay, then, say, if only I had a place to practice soulsmithing right here. That would be convenient, but I'm not really looking to make a construct. Please say it. If I only had a place, worry no more, my student. With my incredible foresight, I have solved your problem long ago. And this is when he pulls out the soul forge. Here's a little bit more of the Ethan that I've gotten used to. So, yeah, this is like mind-blowing. Lyndon is in here, and the altar that has like fire burning in it, it's a blue flame, and when he pulls his marble out, it's like a really similar type of flame. And he asks, how does it work? Again, Ethan says, why don't you tell me? Maybe anything you put here is altered, enhanced, maybe? This fuels the effect somehow. I assume you have to burn something here. Soul fire? No. Wait. He pulled out the pearl necklace he'd found earlier. The physical form of the necklace burned to ash in an instant, which dissolved to nothing with a hiss, but the flames strengthened. Just to test it out, he tossed in some junk with no authority whatsoever. It burned up, but the flame didn't change. It takes objects with embedded authority and burns them, focusing on whatever you're making above the altar. Very good. We say objects with invested authority or willpower are significant, but the terminology changes from place to place, so it's not important. You're so right. It brings a tear to my eye. This is really fascinating to me. And it makes so much sense why this would be incredibly valuable. Essentially, what Ethan says, if you were to do this, to try and accomplish the same type of smithing without a soul forge, you would have to go to a battlefield in which monarchs have died to get that kind of power in it for a monarch's sword. And there aren't many battlefields where monarchs have died. So this solution was created, a portable location that can increase the level of existence of projects, allowing the manipulation of more advanced forces. It's not quite as good as if you crafted a device in a significant location that suited the object, but it has the advantage of being universally compatible and mobile. Lyndon wanted to rub his cheek all over the anvil, and I was like, your cheek, Lyndon? You wanted to rub your cheek all over it? I don't believe you. It's fine. We won't go into that any further. But I have my theories on that. So, this is when he hears that it's been being handed on to him eventually. And he says, gratitude, master. You never call me that. It's probably for the best. I don't want status to go to my head. And then we go to Osriel. And information restricted. This is interesting. So, even though this is from a lot of Osriel's POV here, we have this whole thing going on with Machiel. And you guys, look, I've already said that Machiel is a pain in the ass, but now that we're now that we're looking at Asriel, I'm sort of like, maybe I can sort of understand Machiel's like concern here. If he wasn't bound by the Eladari Pact, he would have gone in and saved that world. That would be a deviation from fate, Machiel argued. In the grand scheme of things, that would lead to greater chaos. But manageable, Asriel said. They could keep the deviations under control, which would rarely, if ever, rise to the point of having to destroy an entire world. While both models had advantages, neither could be proven conclusively. And then Asriel discovers restricted records of the Court of Seven regarding the Executor program. Raise people up from iterations, not sworn to the way, who could interfere without compromising their oaths. And I was just like, I mean, yeah, but also, yikes. Like, I see it, but God, that's dangerous. It feels really, really risky. Okay, so he goes to Haven. And he talks to the Mad King. I don't love that either. Basically, you're going to somebody and asking them, well, what's the real problem? And they're like, well, the problem is the Abaddon. Being sworn to order made them too inflexible and bound to their own thoughts. Creativity and flexibility were beyond them. And the second that anyone started pushing at the boundaries of their rules, the offending party would be condemned. Look, I'm not saying he doesn't have a point, because he probably does. I don't know enough about what's happening with the Abaddon to really make a judgment call on that. But most of the time when people are too committed to a certain set of rules, it isn't a good thing. But also, we've seen what he's doing now. You know, the Mad King is really fucking just wasting entire iterations for the shit of it, is the vibe. Now, it might not be. Asriel might be behind a lot of this. It says he would call the people that he, has working beneath him Reapers. And if he could get enough support, he could create an official division and would recruit Darumon. Guy, what? Asriel is crazy powerful, but I just don't understand why he thinks that he could control somebody like Darumon. Why would you? It says Asriel was uniquely able to handle Class 1 fiends, but I'm not entirely certain why that... Do we know exactly why that is? Is it because of his destruction power? Or... So... And Darumon says, if you really are committed to changing shit up, you should just join the brochure. That's essentially what we're doing anyway. And I honestly can see his point here, you know. What Asriel is attempting to do, it sounds like, is create change from the inside. And that, frankly, does not often work. It's really hard to pull off. So, yeah, he pleads his case for doing this. The only person who would even consider it is Suriel, and even she's kind of And he decides that he's just going to keep trying. He knows it's not going to be easy, and that's where that ends. So, then we go to chapter 13. And Yeren gives everybody a big hug and then carries them upward. And I really enjoy this moment where Yeren thinks that she's going to have to explain to them what her plan is, but they are all apparently so on board with what she's about to do anyway, that she's like, oh, actually, maybe I've underestimated them and I don't have to tell them. And sure enough, when they get up there, everybody immediately launches into attack defense mode. And she's like, okay, good, we've got it. Seal yourselves off when I'm gone, Yeren ordered. Zeal had already started forging runes over their heads. So, whatever was in the chamber above her felt nauseating. And the higher she got, the more the sensation churned her gut. she still wasn't prepared when she cleared the upper entrance. Eyes glowing with the pale green of Death Madra glared at her from every direction. It wasn't the only thing in here. Dread beasts had half merged into the flesh, melted as this thing fed. And its spiritual presence, it wasn't a dread god. It didn't have the endless sensation of the Phoenix or the Titan, though its corruption was equal. She would call it a herald, but it felt more like half a dozen heralds stitched together and smeared across the chamber. Its spiritual pressure crashed over her, and she found it hard to take a breath as every eye in the room focused on her. Tendrils of flesh snaked across the entrance to block off her retreat, but Yeren wasn't about to let it get its way. This thing might have been a highly advanced dread beast, but it was full of blood. And I was like, oh, I really thought you were just going to leave, Yeren. I really did. I don't know why I thought that, because, has Yeren fled from anything? Probably she has, once or twice, but mostly she does not. She couldn't launch the technique down, or she'd risk killing her friends. So she held onto her shining sword as she fell toward the tendrils of dead, animated flesh. Then she twisted sideways, unleashing the beam of concentrated silver-red energy horizontally. It scraped the monster away from the entrance and sliced through its huge body, releasing a roar that shook her bones as much as her ears. She continued falling down as the air filled with Death Madra. Just honestly, guys, keeping track of what she's doing is hard. In the instant she crashed into their platform, Yeren saw Orthos, Zeal, and Mercy all staring at her in astonishment. If they hadn't sensed her coming, they would have met her with a barrage of techniques, but none of them could move as fast as she did. With all the strength she could muster, she slammed a foot down on the forged Madra below. The explosion of death above her was still coming, and gravity was too slow. So she grabs them and yanks them down. And it says the malicious presence of the roomful of flesh was weaker. Clearly, it couldn't follow her. Once they endured this technique, they would be safe. Then she felt another will barge in, the intelligence that ran throughout the walls, a ravenous, desperate will. Below her, the entrance blurred as the labyrinth shifted again. And I was like, God damn it. But then I thought, well, maybe they'll get reunited, and they do. Lyndon and Ethan run into Yeren and the rest of the crew, and poor fucking Orthos is ready to shit his pants. He hated that so much. I cannot say I blame him at all. And he says something about how much worse it is when you're small, which does make a lot of sense. This would all be scary enough, but undergoing it all when you feel sort of insignificant physically, yikes, so much worse. So let's see. He's checking on Yeren, finding out about the herald level creature that is above them. And Yeren is like, we don't have to worry about it. We'd feel it coming from a mile off. And just as she says this, there is a hole that opens up. And there's the exact vibe coming out of it. And Yeren is just like, yup, like that. There it is. So, this is when Mercy announces that she can back them up, but she feels like Sue is getting tired. And it never really occurred to me that Sue could get tired. I don't, but how does Sue work? How does that happen? I would think that Mercy might have to use her Madra to work Sue. So is Mercy saying that she's tired? She says, I can use the binding once or twice more. So maybe it's just the binding that's tired. I forget how that actually, because you have to activate it. But yeah, once she said it that way, I was kind of like, ooh, I don't like that your weapon can feel tired. That didn't even occur to me. And they all notice at this point that Ethan is still standing there with this weird expression. He hasn't spoken since they all like ran into one another. And Lyndon starts looking around. And high on the far wall, he saw a giant symbol, a scythe hanging like a crescent moon over the Aurelius family crest. This room had once belonged to the Aurelius family patriarch. And this makes Lyndon, there's dream tablets all around them, and he's suddenly like, oh shit, these might be a lot more interesting than I thought. He tries to like view one of them, and the subject matter shoves him out of the dream tablet so that his head hurts. And we've seen that happen before in Ghostwater. He found some dream tablets that were above his level. And I think Zeal had to like help him out because he knocked himself out unconscious one time. But we haven't encountered something of that level since. So even Lyndon is kind of like, God damn, I haven't been through that in a minute. So in Windy Forests, his hand opened the ivory box. The scripts activate. He's proud of their efficiency. They're a work of art in the way they synergize with the significance of the bones and of the box itself. The device is now designed for one purpose, and it fulfills that purpose before him now. So guys, we wind up finding out he made penance, which I don't know why I didn't figure that by now, because penance is pure destruction. But I never stopped to wonder where penance came from. Why would I? It doesn't feel like it would matter, but evidently it's pretty fucking important. So he finds that out from the one that Yaren is looking at. She tells him to come over and check this one out. And then there's one that Ethan has. The enemy is desperate. He's already bloody and beaten, low on Madra, as he has been tormented and kept on the edge of defeat for days now. Osmanthus looks down... Osmanthus. I always want to say Osmanthus. Osmanthus looks down on him in disdain. There's barely any willpower remaining in this technique. So this prisoner tosses his axe to the ground and drops onto his heels. "Kill me," the man says through a raspy throat. Osmanthus gives him a razor-edged smile. "You tried to kill me. You put my children in danger. Why should I show you mercy? Your death would have been clean. What a comfort that is to me." Osmanthus began a forger technique of his own, and shimmering black stars hung in the air over his prisoner's head, the hollow king's crown. "Cycle," he ordered. "Restore your Madra. Give me practice, and then I will give you mercy." The memory skipped ahead after that, and he demonstrated his dismantling technique twice more, once on the prisoner's striker technique, and then again on the man's remnant. Lyndon committed it to memory, and Dross assured him that with some alterations they should be able to develop a version of it themselves. Lyndon suspected he might actually be better at it than Osmanthus Aurelius had been. He had 3 compatible Madra types that could be used to take apart the techniques of others, and pure Madra was better at taking apart spiritual energy than destruction Madra was. But despite the gains he'd made through the memory, he was left with a sick feeling. The man had an arrogance that permeated his every thought. He was the best, and he knew it. The prisoner really had tried to assassinate him, so Lyndon didn't feel much pity for him. But neither was he comfortable with the Aurelius Patriarch's callous disregard. And Lyndon comes out of the memory, and he just says something about, the path of the Hollow King is destruction. I didn't know that, because he doesn't really want to, criticize Ethan's ancestor to him, I think. And Ethan doesn't meet his eyes when talking about it. I found myself less than comfortable with destruction Madra. I have seen the Patriarch's memories myself. His experiences were enough to cause me to develop a distaste. And I was glad to hear that, because you never know how people are going to react. Some people can have very surprising reactions to things. And I was glad that Ethan was like, yeah, I didn't love it either, you know? And honestly, I found it really interesting because, like, we've seen Osriel's path, and I don't mean, like, how the books call a path. I mean, like, the progression of his life and the way that things have, like, gone for him. But I don't feel like we got a great look at his personality. And finding out that he feels so incredibly arrogant when Lyndon's looking through these memories, I didn't feel like I got a ton of arrogance off of him when we were looking at some other stories of his life. So something either happened to cause him to sort of turn a corner, or it was just the way that we were being told the story before sort of masked that, or just didn't get into it, you know? And there also is the aspect of, like, when you do turn out to be better than everybody at a certain, like, major skill, avoiding becoming arrogant about it is really, really tricky. It's not an easy thing to avoid. I mean, you know, everybody's gassing you up all the time and you see evidence of it yourself every day. I can only imagine that this would happen. So anyway, we're talking about then the various failures that he created in his working up to making penance. And they're in the midst of, like, wondering how much of these like dream tablets they can actually take with them, because they're, like, lodged into the walls. And so they would have to break the walls apart in order to pull them out. And while that's possible, Lyndon would have to use a lot of energy to do it, and he doesn't know that it's worth it. And Lyndon flicked through one, because Mercy is pointing to one. It wasn't as cohesive a memory. It was just a series of impressions. Once, it had been a map of the labyrinth. I have compiled the information, but much of the memory is faded, as this environment lacks a way to replenish dream aura. So that's potentially really helpful, and thank God they found it when they did. And then we have the big prize. There was one thing that stood out even more. The wall showed an X scratched into the bottom of what had once been a diagram of the labyrinth. It marked the lowest room. Osmanthus's emotions urged those that would come behind him to make their way to that room. He had left a test and a prize for anyone who proved themselves worthy. And Ethan is like, yeah, that's exactly what you think. That's a soulsmith's inheritance. It's not like all of it, because he hadn't ascended when he made this, but he was so insanely powerful already that it would be beyond value. Like, you wouldn't be able to place a value on it. So, yeah, that's exactly what you think it is. And you can see if you can get it. And I'm like, oh, I knew there was going to be massive treasure in here. But, like, and potentially he could fix Dross with it. Like, I just want that to happen real bad. So, Lyndon is like, all right, maybe we can just, like, go for it. How do we do it? And he's in the midst of trying to formulate a plan when there is this roar. And they're trying to see, like, sense where the threat is coming from. Nothing happens for a minute. And Ethan is trying to use his, like, bloodline power to figure out what's going on. And all of a sudden, he just says, run. Lyndon, we need a hole in the wall right here. And then he starts giving everybody orders. Yeren, guard the tunnel. Zeal, we need veiling scripts now. Mercy, put up the dream of darkness past the scripts. Orthos, help Lyndon with the wall. Then webs of hunger Madra shot from every direction. Everyone had to dodge. The strands of hunger were more difficult to disrupt than any they'd faced so far. They pushed through the hollow domain, carrying stronger will before Ethan eradicated them with concentrated striker techniques. Too late, Yeren said, and then Lyndon felt what she had a moment later. An overwhelming presence had been unveiled, and it felt like the twisting of space. The Death Madra swelled to meet it and was battered back, then torn apart. They heard the tearing of meat echo down the hallway, followed by a deafening silence, and all of them knew who was coming. Reigan Shen. And that is the end of that chapter. Guys, I just barely stayed within a time limit, like not even quite, for 3 chapters. I really think that I deserve some props for that. But also, I do feel like I didn't get to talk about everything the way I wanted to, so it's tragic. But I'm doing my best. I am dying, guys. I'm dying. I'm not excited about them all meeting up with Reigan Shen this quick. I don't love it. Onehu was talking about Mercy's weapon. I think it's because she's pushing the Archlord binding in Sue while she is still an Underlord, forcing the binding to compensate for her. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Thank you, Nehua. All right. So thank you all again so much for coming and hanging out with me. Hopefully you guys can make it next Tuesday as well. Thank you, Andy, for commissioning this episode. And I'm going to try next time to be a little bit more concentrated on specific points. I don't usually take notes when I read anymore. I used to try and do it, but I found it slowed me down to a point that it felt like I wasn't experiencing the book naturally. But I'm going to try and do maybe some more highlighting and stuff to make it a little bit more streamlined. So I hope y'all can bear with me. But I hope you're enjoying the coverage anyway. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.